I want you to briefly to your neighbor tell them probably the one key thing, if you may have to turn around to find somebody, one brief thing, take 30 seconds to tell your neighbor what you know or remember most about Gideon. So for 30 seconds, go ahead, turn and talk to your neighbor. I'm giving you permission. Not that you need it always, but go ahead. What do you know or remember most about Gideon? We're going to be spending the morning talking about him, looking at his life. If you were here with us last night, you may have an advantage. All right, well, as we look at Gideon's life, I encourage you, we're not going to look at all of Judges 6, but Judges 6 kind of does a very good job at describing his life from the very beginning to the end. We're only looking at 4 verses, but Judges 6 is where we're going to be at. Before we get there, though, I want to give a little bit of a background because we're not covering much. The next couple weeks, we're going to be looking at a series called Commitment Issues. It's going to be looking at kind of the areas of our life, of our culture, of the church that deal with those areas that we don't like to fully commit to. We like to see if the water's warm or cold before we actually jump in. We were hesitant. We kind of stumble and go back and forth. And so we're going to be looking at some really uncomfortable topics, if you will. Today we're going to be looking at kind of our past, our decisions in the past, the fear of the future as we look at Gideon's life and trying to figure out where that comes to. But as we were looking and going over things, trying to come up with our banner that we use on Facebook, that we use for Sunday mornings for kind of publicizing any kind of media, whatever, we were coming up with kind of a blank. I found a few things, and when you look at commitment issues and things like that, if you type it into Google, oftentimes it comes up with relationship advice. And we're like, well, we're not wanting to deal solely with relationships. We're going to deal with that, and that will be part of it for sure. But it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper. We're going to look at kind of our money, our commitment issue of making sure that we have enough, that we hold on to it as tightly, that we don't want to commit to trusting God wholeheartedly. We want to look at the church, and do we actually commit to being the church, to coming together, and all that. We just spent an entire series on that following. And so we're going to look at a bunch of potentially uncomfortable topics. And while I was looking at trying to give Pastor Vince a direction to go, the only thing that came up is in images. Someone else did a series, and I just had the words, and underneath it said, a series not for the faint of heart. And it's kind of where we're going. The issues that we're going to be talking about aren't something to really be taken lightly. It's going to kind of confront us where we're at. It's going to ask us, are we actually committing to the things God has called us to, or are we kind of hesitant? Are we holding back? Where are we at in our commitments? I want to look at a quick example that we'll be using throughout this morning. When I was 13, I was able to be introduced to the idea of rock climbing, and more specifically, rappelling. Has anybody gone rock climbing or rappelling? A few. All right, so one of the things that you learn when you rappel, and it's quite unnerving, is they say, we're going to take you up. And if you've been helping us on the roof and anything else, if you go out the back and you stand at the very top and the very peak of the church building and look straight down, it's about 30 to 35 feet is all. It's not that bad. And so when I was 13, they took us up and we hiked. We didn't get to climb up the rock face. They took us around this very backwards way, and we get up and they said, we're about 45 to 50 feet up. You'll be able to rappel all the way down. We'll have somebody at the bottom kind of helping, being your safety line to be able to make sure that you're safe going through all this. But the basic idea you need to understand is you just need to basically sit down in your harness and just kind of fall backwards. And we're like, you just said it's 50 feet, and you want to, and so literally, so you go to the edge, and they said you're going to kind of tip over, and you're going to hang off the edge, and you're just going to kind of like sit back and fall back into your harness. And most of us are like, I'm 13 years old. I have a lot of life left in me. I don't think this is smart. And so the guy said, we'll show you. I'll go down because he said, I need to be down there to be able to belay and to spot you. And so I'll go first, kind of just watch. And man, he was a pro. He got up there and just like, woot, and went down. Fantastic. And so the first guy that went, he said, okay, I can do this. And he turned around and he kind of did one of these numbers. He's like, only he couldn't step backwards like that. And eventually he got to the point where he started to tip backwards and try to catch himself and skid down the entire front of him down the rock face. And the instructor that was at the top is like, don't do what he did. He said you have to fully commit to it. You can't kind of half-heartedly do it, because if you do, you're going to slide. And we got down and looked at the guy that went first, and his knees and his shins were scraped up. He lifted up his shirt, and his stomach and everything just kind of went all the way up, and was just kind of this bloodied, scratched up mess. And we're like, yeah, I'm glad I didn't do what he did. And it was kind of this interesting time of like, okay, in order to understand rappelling, you have to fully commit to it. There is no in between. It's either you're going to do it or not. And if you are somewhere in the middle of that, it's going to hurt. Somewhere down the road, if you don't fully do it with all that is in you, you're going to run into a situation that's going to cause a lot of pain. And I think that's where we see in our lives, we don't like those commitment times. We either kind of stay back and are safe and we don't actually take that step of faith, or we do it kind of half-heartedly and we do really well for a little bit, or we get bumped and bruised for a little bit and then we kind of find our footing instead of fully getting out there. And that's where we're going to be looking at for the next couple weeks, and especially this morning, is that full-on trust issue. The other thing in rappelling you have to understand is the person at the bottom. Once you get to the point where you actually understand climbing and rappelling and everything, you can do it on your own. But until then, you always have somebody at the bottom spotting you. You always have somebody down there that has your rope and has kind of basically, and all honestly, your lifeline to be able that if you mess up, they can actually stop it for you. And it takes a lot of trust to be able to say, okay, I'm not only going to trust that the rope that is wrapped around me, keeping me safe 60 feet in the air, is going to do its job, but I also have to trust that the guy at the bottom who is holding the lifeline has me. That there is that trust and that commitment that I can say, not only do I trust the line and what I'm doing, I also trust the other person on the end. And for us this morning, we're going to look at the story of Gideon and how that relates to God. Just out of a quick whatever and a show of hands, how many described Gideon as the guy that led an army of 300 clay jars, or somebody that had to take God's people down to the water? How many described him in that way, shape, or form? Something along those lines. A few. How many know who Gideon is? About the same amount. All right. So I'm going to walk us through this really quickly. We're going to start in verse 36. So if you'd go ahead and turn there. I'm going to summarize the first 36 verses for us. And there's a guy named Gideon. And this is long after Egypt and kind of a time after Joshua. Joshua basically has died and said, okay, go live the way you're supposed to. And Israel said, no, we're good. I want to do my own thing. And so at this point in the story where Gideon becomes kind of a central figure, they're already worshiping the Baals, the gods of the Midianites. They have a sacred pole. They have an altar there. They're in captivity, and so they kind of have to hide. And so Gideon, when we're introduced to him, is beating wheat in a wine press. Weird, he's in a wine press, but he's hiding. He's trying to keep from the Midianites what is actually going on, that they're trying to collect and gather stuff for themselves. And so he's in hiding, and he goes out, and underneath this oak tree is the angel of the Lord, and he goes up to him and has this kind of conversation, and the angel says, I'm calling you to do something great. You're going to be a warrior for the Lord. You're going to deliver his people. And Gideon's response in looking at our commitment issues is, how can I lead God's people? How can I be a warrior? You're telling me all of these great and wonderful things that you kind of want me to do, and that God has this plan. But you have to understand, I'm the least in my family. I'm from the tribe of Manasseh. There isn't a lot that comes from me. I'm hiding in a wine press trying to collect what I can. I'm not this bold person that goes out and does great things. It's me. How can I? And I think as we begin our series, that's where I want to start and looking at this how can I, because I think we all have those. How can I do the job that God has called me to do when I don't have what I think I need? How can I be able to raise a family on my own? How can I raise a family with my family that I have? Like, I feel like I'm falling short. How can I do what God has called me to do when I feel inadequate? I can't commit to saying, yeah, I want to be this person you're calling me to, because I don't see it in myself. I'd rather play it safe and stand on top of the rock ledge before I even have to take that step over and even have to think about that, because I don't think I have what it takes. Steve was talking about district assembly and kind of giving you an overview about just that one person. And one of the things that they were talking about is it isn't pastors that make great churches. It's great churches that make great pastors. And what we're trying to see and trying to revive is the call of everyone, not just the pastor. It's the pastor's job to do that. That's why we have him here. He's supposed to be doing all that. I don't need to. And I look at this how can I statement. Well, how can I go out to our community and show them the love of Christ when I didn't go to seminary? How can I do what the pastors of the church do, because I don't have that training? How can I? And it's amazing that as we have done our roofing project and putting everything together, that God sends people at the right time to be able to do the things we need them to do. For example, we were up on the roof and getting everything tore off, and everything was going wonderfully, and we realized, man, it is hot, it is tiring, and this kind of stinks. And we smelled bad as well, but that was a different kind of whatever. And about that time, Gail Wadsworth, we have two Gails, so I'm gonna single her out, shows up, and she's in the back parking lot. She says, I just brought a lot of Gatorade and water in the back. And we're like, thank you, Jesus, that somebody's thinking about us staying hydrated when it's 120 degrees on this roof. We weren't thinking that. So we have somebody, and God's like, you need to go get water, you need to do this, and it was wonderful. A little bit later, we're like, man, we have a massive mess down there. We need to start cleaning it up. And we have a lot of teens that were able to show up, and they started being able to pick up stuff, throwing it in the dumpster. Our dumpster's out here. You can see all the trash and everything that we collected. This is only one of the dumpsters, by the way. But they were picking it up. And it was amazing to see people being able to come and use their gifts. And it's the same way when it comes to being able to spread the gospel and do what God has called us to do. It may not look like a seminary or a well-educated degree, but God is going to gift us and give us what we need. And so that's what he did for Gideon. Gideon says, you know what, wait here, I'm going to come back, I'm going to go get some stuff, I want to make sure I have commitment issues, so I need to be able to prove it first. So he goes home, and he grabs a kid, and he grabs unleavened bread and broth, and he takes it out and places it on a stone. Before we get further, kid is a young goat. And so he grabs the kid, the unleavened bread and broth, puts it on the stone, dumps the broth over all of it. And the angel of the Lord takes his staff, reaches out, touches the rock, and it is engulfed in flames, and the angel of the Lord disappears. He says, okay, God, I get it. I'll be the man of God, the warrior that you've called me to be. I'll go and do what you need me to do. And so he goes, he gets what the angel of the Lord said. He grabs his father's bull and another bull, and they go, and Gideon tears down the altar of Baal. He cuts down the sacred pole and uses the wood from the sacred pole as kindling for a fire, and he basically sacrifices the second bull on it as an offering to God. And when the Midianites find out, they are extremely upset. Then they go to Gideon's father when they find out that it was Gideon that had done all this and say, we want your son to come out. We're going to kill him because he tore down the altar to Baal. He cut down our sacred pole. He needs to pay for this. And I think it's interesting, Gideon's father's response. He says, if your gods are so great, if they're so upset at what my son did, why aren't they here dealing with him? Well, why does it take you to speak on the behalf of your gods? And so I'm not giving you my son. If they really are that upset, let your gods deal with my son. And so nothing happens. Midianites hear about it, and they begin to rally an army and get ready to fight and go to war. And that's where we're going to pick up this morning in verse 36. So if you would, join me in reading Judges 6, 36 through 40. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wolf fleece on the threshing floor. If there is dew only on the fleece and all the ground is dry, then I will know you will save Israel by my hand as you have said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more time to test the fleece, but this time make the fleece dry and let all the ground be covered with dew." That night God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. Heavenly Father, as we look at your word and the life of Gideon and how it applies to us today, God, I pray that you would give us wisdom and insight to understand our own commitment issues. That you'd speak to us, that you would encourage us, that you would give us faith and trust in you to be able to know that you have wonderful things in store for us, a plan for us to prosper and do the things that you have called us to do. So God, be with us, speak to us, and meet us where we are. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. So I like Gideon's story. I like the 300 men going and defeating an entire army with just clay jars and torches. It's wonderful. But I think there's something bigger going on in Gideon's life. There's kind of this idea of doom and gloom coming on Israel, and God says, "I'm raising up a judge to be able to save Israel." They just had Joshua kind of lead them and was this awesome commander and somebody that God had used to be able to deliver them. And now Gideon is here, and Gideon kind of likes to take the back seat, if you will. He likes to be able to make sure that everything that God is saying to him is true, that it's not some funky food that he ate that is giving him this weird vision or hearing things. He wants to prove it. And I think that's where we are as a culture and a society. If you watch TV or infomercials or stay up till 2 o'clock and almost buy Ginsu knives because you think that they're really going to cut metal and tomatoes and all that and everything that they say, you know kind of how the speeches and the sales pitches go. You know, we'll give you a 30-day trial, a money-back guarantee that if this doesn't just absolutely revolutionize your life, we'll give you it back. You just have to pay shipping and handling. Or the 30-day trial, you know, we'll give you a free subscription. You can try, well, for Apple Music, it's only 14 days. We'll give you 14 days of Apple Music, and then after that, if you don't like it, you can cancel. You don't have to worry about it. We want you to be happy with what you are committing to buy. It has this kind of idea that we already know that they're fearful of buying or making that commitment. We enter the conversation knowing that we have commitment issues. Something that kind of hits close to home is if you look at professional teams. If you play fantasy football, you know that it's easy to play fantasy football because you get to pick and choose your players rather than teams, because teams change so frequently. From year to year, they rarely look the same because the players always follow the money. They don't have a commitment to a team or an organization. They have a commitment to how much they're getting paid. We had the opportunity to be able to, by the way, I'm a Cowboys fan in case you didn't know that, but we had the opportunity years ago to be able to extend a contract, to commit to DeMarcus Ware. Fantastic defensive end, and we dropped the ball, and so Denver ended up picking him up, and I'm not saying it's the reason they won Super Bowls, but it definitely helped them in their long run. And you can see the commitment issues that we have, that we don't want to do that. We'll start to hit maybe a little bit closer to home. In the last couple of years, I've been able to do a few weddings. And in every wedding that I have done, we have this growing trend of people needing to live together before they're married. All the weddings I've done, they live together first. I don't want to commit because what if you snore weird, or what if you have weird kitchen habits, or what if you're a sly? And so we have this idea. We go back many years ago to maybe even a TV show that maybe helped spur this movement, and look at Friends. Popular TV show. Many people watch it, know what I'm talking about, but almost all of them lived together before they ended up getting married. We look at our dating example that we have created today, and it falls along the same lines. I'm going to date someone, and as soon as something goes wrong, then I can back out of the commitment. I don't have to continue on that I'll do it as long as it fits me, and when it doesn't, then I'm out, I'm done, call it off. And you look at cell phone plans, and I know that's really bad to be able to kind of compare the two, but have you noticed that almost all cell phone carriers anymore don't have contracts? That they don't make you sign a 2-year commitment anymore, that most of them understand that people want to be able to bail as soon as they don't like something. We've created a culture and a society that is afraid of commitment unless they get to try it first and can prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that it's going to work. What's even worse than all of those is the marriage and divorce rate. And I think it's especially shocking within churches and people who profess faith in Christ and understand that commitment is lifelong. And it is scary. I mean, if you think about it, it's like I'm committing to one person to live with them for the rest of my life until I die or death, whatever. If they're poor, if they're sick, if there's something massively wrong, I have to be there from the good times and the bad. So, I mean, it is a serious commitment. So I did a little bit of research in the American Psychological Association in 2017. Came out with an article that said that marriage and divorce are both common experiences in the Western Hemisphere, that 90% of people marry by the age of 50. And I think that sounds pretty accurate. If you go around and kind of look at our demographic, that everybody usually that is going to be married is married by the age of 50. Pretty, I can get that. So healthy marriages are good for couples' mental and physical health. They're also good for children. Growing up in happy home protects children from mental, physical, educational, and social problems. They're saying that if you have both mom and dad, if there are parents in the home that have a well-working relationship, a strong marriage, that it helps in multiple areas. And so I want to stop there before we continue in the study that they did and look at where we're at today. If our marriage and divorce rate continues to increase, we're seeing problems in schools around the world, in our U.S., the country, like we have serious problems that are taking place, and it could stem all the way back to marriage commitments. Our children are growing up in unhappy homes. They don't feel safe or protected, and as a result, I want to say when we moved here, one of the things that Callie and I were shocked at is the graduation rate in the Dalles when we moved here was 59%. High school graduation for the people that actually enroll their freshman year to graduation date was 59%. It should be kind of a concerning and shocking number. It goes on to say that, however, even though we have these married couples before they're 50, 40 to 50% of the married couples in the U.S. end in divorce. And each subsequent marriage after that is more likely to end in divorce, and the percentage goes up from there. We look at this idea of commitment issues and wanting to prove it. Gideon has kind of this opportunity. God says, I'm going to use you. I'm going to lead you all the way. He says, God, I want to make sure that it's not my hand that is doing it, because God has very clearly said that I'm going to make sure that Israel knows that it's me that is doing this. That it's not any human being, it's not Israel as a country that's able to do it, that they need to be able to trust in God to be able to deliver them. That God needs to be at the very center, and it's the same for marriage, that as we grow closer to God, couples should be able to draw closer in relationship to one another. And I want to go back to our example of rappelling. And when I was in college, I had a roommate that said, hey, let's go rock climbing. And I thought that was great. Rock climbing, I've been rappelling, I loved it. It's great. He says, what size of shoe do you wear? I said 12. And he said, well, I have a pair of shoes that are 11, but they'll work. You want them to fit tight anyway. Let's go. And I was like, when I went rappelling, I didn't need shoes. He said, well, trust me, where we're going, you'll need shoes. And so we drive out, and I thought we were going to an indoor climbing wall, college students and not whatever. He's like, no, I have all my gear. We're going out to this rock face. And we get to the rock face, and like I said, this is from outside to the ground was 35 feet. We get to the rock face, and he's like, so the climb, he's like, if you make it all the way to the top is 120 feet. He said we could go further, but we're not going to. 120 feet is going to be our max for today. And I'm like, nope, ain't happening. I think I made it about 50, 60 feet up, and I was happy with that. But he said, so here's the deal with the shoes. He said, the shoes that I'm giving you are special, but you have to, again, fully commit to what you're doing. That you can't kind of second guess or do it half-heartedly, or the shoes aren't going to work the way that they're designed to, and you're going to get hurt. I was like, okay, sure, whatever. He said, for an example, and everybody can kind of do this with me, if you stick out your pinky and kind of hold it out sideways like that, he said most of the things that you'll be able to stand on are going to be narrower than your pinky, but the shoes will hold you. I'm like, there's no shoes that are that good. Like, I don't care how thin of an edge that is. I weigh 100 and I think at that time 95 pounds. So we'll stick with that story. I weigh 195 pounds. There's no shoe that's going to hold me on a ledge that thin. And so I went up, and the first whatever I was able to do, and I was like, oh, these shoes are awesome. They really work. Like, I can actually do this. And then I got up about 45 feet and had another one of these ledges, and I was like, I don't know if these shoes can actually hold me on this. And they didn't, because I didn't fully commit. I had my toe in there, and when things started going bad, I dropped my toe out of it. And remember the kid I was telling you about that had the skinned up shins, knees, and stomach? That became me. I got down, and I was sore. I tried to go to bed that night and pulled a sheet over, and I was like, nope. I hope it's hot enough, because I'm not putting a sheet on where I hurt right now, because it just is too painful. But the other observation I made was my roommate that was climbing with me was the one that was holding the safety rope, the other end. You don't get to hold your own rope when you go mountain climbing, so you have to completely depend on the other person. And so when I did second guess myself and fall, Marcos was there to be able to make sure that I didn't kill myself, quite literally. Again, we come back to this issue with Israel needing to say, we're going to fully trust in God. We see Gideon's life saying, you know, God, I want to make sure that I am going to move out of the way for you to be able to go through and lead me into whatever situation you have for me. You see, a lot of these issues that I think we have with our commitment and making sure that we have to prove something come out of an area where we don't have that trust. You know, I'm going to trust as far as I'm comfortable, and then when I can't and I can't prove it, I'm going to back out. I've had conversations where people are like, you know, if you can prove to me scientifically, beyond the shadow of doubt, that God exists, that Jesus is whatever, I will believe it wholeheartedly, and I'll never look back. And if that's where you're at, if that's what it's going to take for you to commit to following God, to being able to allow God to lead you, there's no amount of evidence that we can show you that you're going to like. It just won't happen. You've already made it up in your mind that even if I were to say, here's God in this nice, pretty little jar, you'd be like, well, that's not God. You try to reason that away. And in most of those conversations, I say, yeah, you're probably right. We don't like to say, you know, I'm going to commit to something that I can't see, even though I know and I believe it's there. Israel knew who God was. He delivered them from Egypt and from the Egyptians' hand. They know the story of the Red Sea, how God parted it, and they were able to get to safety. They've seen Joshua and know the stories of him leading them into the promised land and tearing down the walls of Jericho. And it wasn't even him, it was God at work. The walls fell from the inside out. And Gideon here says, God, I'm going to do the same thing. I want to get out of the way. I'm going to trust you with everything so that when I actually go into battle, it's not me. You see, I think we find ourselves like Gideon, and God has something great and wonderful in store for us. We don't remember Gideon's commitment issues. We remember that God was able to use him to defeat the Midianite army with clay jars and torches. We remember the grace of God going before Gideon and giving him the strength and ability to be able to lead God's people when God was the one that did it the entire time. You see, our commitment issue is that we've seen things in our past, we see things around us that keep us from being able to trust God. We have this ability to say, God, I know you have something great and marvelous planned for my life, but I'm struggling. Well, we're giddy and we go, I want you to do this thing. I want you to prove that you are God and that you do have the best plan for me. And so I want you to prove it to me. And when he does, we're like, yeah, it could have been a fluke. The fleece, somebody could have just dumped water on it. So let's flip it and do it again. And no matter how many times we do it, it will take us committing to something. We can say, God, I want you to be able to answer this prayer, and then we try to reason it away. Well, yeah, but it wasn't really God. It was this that had effect, and it's been long enough that it probably just cured itself. And, why do we reason away what God is doing? We have commitment issues. We don't want to say that is the case because then we actually have to follow through. So I want to leave us with this thought this morning as we close. In our kind of cold feet society, is there something that you're having a hard time committing to? Has God called you to do something and he's showing you kind of the way he says, here is this wonderful plan I have for you. I have this plan to see you prosper. I have this plan that if you allow me to lead you into this area, you will succeed. But we're on the edge, getting ready to fall back. We're like, yeah, no, I'd rather play it safe. Or, yeah, I've seen this before, and I've tried to do it kind of half-heartedly, and I ended up scraping my knees, and I really don't want to deal with that again. Are there those things that we're just struggling to be able to step over the edge and complete surrender and faith? Knowing that God does have our best, that he is taking care of that when or if something bad happens, he's there to catch us, to protect us and make sure that we are doing what he's called us to. If that is, I want to be able to pray for you, and that's going to be our prayer as a church body. So if you'll go ahead and join me in prayer, we're going to close and begin to have a time of response. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this morning that you have given us. We thank you for the weather that we've had and just the provision, the guidance, the safety this week as everyone was out. And we know that you truly do protect and watch over us, that you have the best plan for us and that you want us to succeed by your standards. God, I pray that you would convict us of those areas in our life that we don't always fully commit and give ourselves to you, whether it's because of past experiences, mistakes that we made, past hurts or regrets. God, I pray that you would remove those. That you'd show us the plan that you have for us is so much more, that you have us defeating armies that stand in our way. But the biggest enemy is ourselves not being willing to step out of the side and let you lead us. So, Father, I pray that this morning we'd be able to take that step, that we'd be able to trust you wholeheartedly, that we'd submit ourselves to your leading, to your calling, that there would no longer be that how can I mentality, but you would show us how we're able to have victory. That we wouldn't need to have the proof that we so desperately need most of the time, that we'd be able to say, God has proven himself over and over again, and so I am going to step out in faith and just trust that you have everything in control. So God, speak to us, meet us where we're at this morning. Lead and guide us into the ways you would have us go. Give us the tools, the equipment, the knowledge that we will need to be able to succeed. And on each step of the way, we look to you, the author and perfecter of our faith. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen.